Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Welcome to the Car Show, and this is episode 5 today. Today we have got a very interesting topic. We have been getting a lot of feedback that since we started the Car Show, we've been talking about women. So we have taken all that feedback, and today we are here with you guys presenting a different topic, which is about men's mental health. And with me is my co-host Ranjit Kaur from UK. Penji, Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. How are you?
I'm good and hope you're doing well as well.
I am, thank you.
That's great. Are you excited about this topic?
I am. I am very
Yes?
excited about this topic, yes.
Yes. I think we have talked enough about women, and it's time to get men into the picture as well, and that's where we are today.
Yes,
So,
no, I totally understand.
Sure. You want to talk about our guests who are coming today?
Yes, so we have two guest speakers today who are going to be talking about this topic, which is about men's mental health. And naturally, women, we talk all the time and discuss issues and a lot of anything that we want to talk about, we just natter with women. But men don't tend to do that. And, why is that? So it seems like maybe perhaps traditionally, men are expected to be manly or breadwinners of the family, or they have to show dominance or control. But we really want to look into this further. And that's why we have two guest speakers from Tarakki. And Tarakki is an organization that works closely with Punjabi communities to reshape approaches to mental health. So today we have Sharanjit Singh, the founder of Tarakki, and we also have Amardeep Singh, who is a coordinator at Tarakki. So we'd like to welcome our guests on the show. So welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming. And so please tell the audience a little about yourself and your background with Tarakki as well.
Awesome. So my name is Sharanjit Singh. I'm the founder and director of Tarakki. And as Benji mentioned, Tarakki is a movement that works with Punjabi communities to reshape approaches to mental health. So I'm sure we'll go into this a bit later, but I started Tarakki in October 2017 after my experiences of mental health challenges when I was transitioning from home to university whilst I was a student. And now we work with a team of 14 absolutely amazing volunteers to take out mental health awareness within Punjabi communities and mental health education, social support, and also we do some research. And so it's been an absolutely amazing experience with Maharaji Skirpa to be able to do this seva so far. And I'm really excited to discuss it a bit more today and discuss a topic that is really close to my heart as well.
That's great. Thank you so much. And Amardeep Singh, can you please help us as well with this?
Yes, I'm Amardeep Singh. I volunteer with Tarakki as a facilitator on the Male Men's Forum and then offer little bits of support in different projects. We have 6 forums, 2 male, 1 in London, 1 in Birmingham, a male and female program in, we have a male project and a female project in London, a male project and a female project in Birmingham. We have a long-established LGBTQ program in London and one that is in its very early stages in Birmingham.
That's great. Thank you so much. So, I've always said emotions have no gender. And this would be great for us to all come together and discuss this topic, which is often ignored or unaddressed because a lot of us don't know much about it. So, Sangatji, whoever's tuned in, if you would like to make any comments or suggestions or you want to ask anything to Tarakki, then please ask those questions today so we can address them as well. And so what are typical alarm bells or signs to identify and recognize like a man's mental health issue? So if one of you can answer, that'd be great.
So I guess I can probably speak from my experiences of when I noticed that I was going through difficulties. So I was born and raised in Handsworth in Birmingham, so very, very multicultural area, lots of different people, lots of different food, all this kind of stuff. But when I transitioned to another city for my university, I was the first to leave Birmingham to go to university in my family. And none of us had really gone through that process before, where we've had to really adapt to a new place completely on our own. And what I noticed in myself was that before, I'd be able to kind of go up to people, be really bubbly and engage with people and just get on with people really well. But in the new city I was in, it was really hard. I found it really, really difficult because there wasn't the same level of diversity. There wasn't the same, people on the street who I was used to seeing, being at the start wearing gusik. It was very difficult for me to actually see myself reflected where I was. And over time, I used to feel very, very self-conscious. I used to feel very, very out of place. And the small things I used to notice in myself that indicated that I was going through some mental health challenges. So those small things were me really just giving up on my routine really easily, me choosing to socially isolate myself instead of engaging with people, me feeling very, very nervous and very, very almost scared in rooms full of people. I used to feel very, very scared in those situations. And also me just not really having the energy to be able to deal with people a lot of the time. And for me, I realized that these were difficulties I was experiencing when we had an event at the university, and I wasn't able to go in and speak to anyone in that room. We were just there. I wanted to speak to people. I wanted to have conversations, but I was unable to have those conversations. And I was going out the room and checking the sports scores on my phone every 10 minutes. But I was just there. I was like, I really want to go and talk. I really want to go and engage with people because, I have my Sangat at home. I want to really create that type of community here as well. But there was something that was really stopping me from doing it. So I guess for me, one main sign for me where I was experiencing mental health challenges was me choosing to socially isolate myself more and more. It was me finding things difficult that weren't difficult before, finding I was losing my energy very, very quickly, and also finding that I was unable to live my life how I wanted to live my life. I wanted to go in and have these conversations with people, but there was something that was stopping me. And so that's when I asked the second question. I was like, okay, maybe it's something else. Maybe there is something else going on that I need to try and think about and I need to try and approach.
And so when you had these and you recognized these signs of yourself, firstly, which city did you move to? So you went from
I moved to
Birmingham
Bristol.
Okay, so that's why you went to Bristol. There's hardly any Apane there, and the community there is very small. So when you recognize these signs, what did you do anything, or did you just let it carry on for a while?
So I had let it carry on for a couple of years until I kind of had this moment where I was at that event and I was like, whoa, I need to do something about this. And at that time, I thought, I don't want to talk to my friends or my family back at home about this. And that wasn't because I thought they would stigmatize me, or that wasn't because I thought they would reject me, but it's because I wanted to be independent. I've moved away from home. I'm living on my own at university. I don't want to go to my family and say, "Oh, I'm having this trouble. I need help with this." I want to be someone who could live independently. And so when I had those difficulties, I actually spoke to the people I was living with. So there was a house, I lived in a house of 8 other people, and these were people from all over. There were a few people from different kinds of backgrounds, different countries, and there were also some people from Birmingham as well. So I'd already had that sense of comfort. And over a longer period of time, we started having these conversations. And a lot of these times it was having conversations with the other men. But it was really important in how we had these conversations because sometimes people think mental health conversations need to be really, really serious. They need to take place in a very specific space. But, we'd be sitting there, we'd be having our dinner, we'd be speaking to each other about these topics, we'd be sitting there playing PlayStation, playing football, all these different kinds of things. But we'd have the conversations in those spaces as well. So I'm really, really grateful for that space because for me, they were the people I went to. They were for me, they showed a really good way of developing Sangat where you can have these conversations openly and honestly, and you're showing genuine compassion and love for each other. And that was how I kind of approached help at that point.
Do you feel like if you speak to someone, half your issue is gone or some of it's gone, or do you feel like it's still there?
So I guess it depends on how long you've been living with these difficulties for. So one of the best skills that we have in our lives, and one things we can all take forward in our lives, is being better listeners. You know, when we're younger, when we're children, we spend a lot of time thinking about how to read, how to write, how to speak. And obviously we use speech, we use reading in a lot of our lives, we write a bit as well. But listening is a skill we do not learn how to do. And what we see when we're adults is that people aren't able to listen effectively. And it's something that is so powerful, because if someone is experiencing difficulties, if someone is going through, or if someone's at the beginning of experiencing their challenges, being able to be heard and being validated is or can be so powerful. And obviously things are different for different people, but I've had some amazing conversations where I've not said anything. And I feel that
Yeah.
is one of the most powerful things we can do. Oftentimes when someone says something to us, we always want to respond. We want to think, oh, do this, do that, or, you know, you need to try this, blah, blah, whatever. But, you know, there is a real power in listening, and listening so the person feels heard rather than listening so that you can speak up with your voice.
Yeah, I think well said. Yes, we always need someone to, vent off our feelings and our emotions. And when we find that, okay, there is someone to, listen to, and we find a support in that person. But that's very important. And even if we look in Japji Sahib, there are 4 parties that we read every day that actually, puts the importance of listening forward as well. So that's how important listening is in our lives. Just moving forward, if one of you could just probably tell us what sort of like mental health issues affect the Punjabi community most.
Amardeep, do you want to cover that a bit?
I would say it'll probably reflect the wider population in terms of high rates of depression. There are a number of factors that can contribute to that. But then also other types of acute psychiatric illness, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, anxiety is a growing thing and is being recorded much more. And of course, there are a number of risk factors to all of these, but certainly the one we see most often is probably unipolar depression. That's the one that's represented most in the statistics and in the conversations that we have in our groups. There are probably certain things that contribute to, or certain risk factors that contribute to that in the Punjabi community. Things like social isolation. Sharanjit's given a good example of that from his own experience, but also if we think to first-generation immigrants who might be away from home, away from family structures, friends, might be isolated, working long hours, etc., in an unfamiliar environment. That you can see how we have certain contributory factors that maybe increase the likelihood in a Punjabi male scenario versus maybe your indigenous population.
Yeah. I think, so it looks it's very common, like if we just look as a generic population of men in Australia, as per the statistics which is provided on the Beyond Blue website, which is one of the leading organization dealing with mental health. They say that men are more than twice as likely as women to have experienced substance disorder, which is like, I think if we talk about Punjabi community, so probably alcoholism is also one of the prominent we can say where it's that kind of disorder is there. And also if we talk about anxiety and depression, men are more likely to experience those kind of mental health issues. So it looks like it's something which is common in Punjabi community as well when we talk about men. But when we talk about Punjabi community and especially Sikh men, when we say Singh, I think that lion kind of figure that turns up on your screen and face. So I think you get an understanding on he's the sher bacha hai, ja sher aadmi hai, something like that. And you feel, no, he won't have any kind of troubles or mental health issues in his life. I think that's a common understanding how we have been picturing about men in our lives. Do you see that kind of, probably as a stigma, which is mainly preventing men from not talking about this or not coming forward?
So,
Yeah.
shall I take? Do you want
So
to take this?
go ahead. Go ahead.
So I find it so interesting because we often say, Bundaban, Sherban, all these different types of things which are telling us to be strong and to be brave. But, in my experience, what I've seen is some of the bravest and strongest men I have seen in my life are people who are open about their emotions and open about their vulnerability. Because at the moment, especially within male populations, we see emotions and we see things like anxiety, things like sadness, things like fear, as being as making us very vulnerable, and men largely do not want to be seen as vulnerable. So the way I like to understand it is that showing your emotions in this way, talking about these topics, is a sign of strength rather than something that is weak. So really, we need to be proving this. I think men across populations need to be proving this, and also women also kind of opening themselves up to these conversations being acceptable is going to be so important moving forward, because these concepts can change, these definitions can change, and our generations have the potential to change this for the better. So when we say Sherban Bandaban, maybe that will one day reflect someone who is in touch with a wide variety of their emotions, someone who is fearless to speak openly about their difficulties, and someone who is really, really motivated to support themselves and support other people in all ways. And so we're at a really important time when it comes to this. And it's one where our Sikh history can really play an important part. We can't just look back and say, Sikh history shows men like this. We need to be brave. We need to be emotionless. We need to learn from. Guru Granth Sahib Ji Maharaj is one of the most amazing sources of a range of different emotions and how to approach these different types of topics in our lives. So we have the best model to look to.
No, that's true. It's a very good example to use as well. Thank you so much. With the current pandemic that we're in right now, so during this time, looking after mental and physical health has never been more important, I feel, especially because I have a small family to look after. What would you suggest to someone who is feeling unstable in this current situation, in these current times? I mean, have you had many calls that have come through, or emails with people telling you their situations? Have you had a lot of concerns?
So Amardeep, if you want to kind of just discuss some bits in relation to the forums, and then I can cover some other bits.
So our usual model is we run a monthly forum where a group of Punjabi males will come together in a specific place. We will discuss a specific topic. Benji's mentioned alcohol abuse. That's been one of our previous topics. We've gone into different issues around mental health, and explaining different types of mental health diagnosis and how to access care, relationships within family, and a broad variety of different things. We would usually do those things in person. With that now not being an option for us, we are moving our programs online as much as possible and trying to open them up online and get people to use different online virtual formats to kind of engage over. Things are changing for us, but also potential service users are also taking a bit of time to get used to doing these kind of things virtually rather than in person. I think Sharanjit can probably talk about the research project that we've undertaken specifically on this subject of COVID and Punjabi community mental health.
Definitely. And just before that as well, we have been receiving a higher amount of emails about different kinds of topics. And one of the things that has really stuck out to me are people who are looking for support for elderly generations. We actually received an email from one organization that said that there is an elderly Punjabi gentleman who uses their organization to deliver food, so has food delivered to him. And he just wanted someone to speak to. He wanted someone because, he's no longer allowed to go to the Gurdwara Sahib. He's no longer allowed to engage with his Sangat in the same way. And so we've seen people, and it's affected all of us in different ways. We've seen our routines, which have had to change so much. But sometimes we forget about older generations whose routines really, really relied on Sangat in the Gurdwara and Langar and engaging in Seva in different ways. And so Maharaj Kripa, there have been so many different Gurdwara in the UK, Sikh organizations who are doing different kinds of seva to provide different services to these people. And we managed to put them in touch with an organization that they did like friendly calls, so they would make little phone calls to older generations who were isolated. And all these little things might seem small to us, they might seem like small parts of our day, but they can be absolutely massive for someone who is experiencing social isolation, someone who's experiencing loneliness, and someone who went from spending their time entirely at the Gurdwara Sahib to someone who's now having to live on their own. And so there are so many different ways we've kind of tried to connect people with different services. And as Amardeep mentioned, we have the research project that we've been doing over the last month and a half, where we're trying to understand what the mental health impacts of COVID-19 are within Punjabi communities. Because in the UK, and I'm sure in many other countries as well, we've seen a lot of discussion around how Black and minority ethnic communities, so non-white communities, how they've experienced disproportionate and different experiences of COVID-19. But often we don't see that broken down a bit more because Black and minority ethnic is a very, very broad term. And so we wanted to really try and focus on Punjabi communities, and that research is going to be coming out in the next month or so. But we had about 465 people who did a survey. We've run about 8 interviews, and so we're really just trying to bring together a few different experiences on this topic. Because if we don't understand what's happened, how are we going to move forward? How are we going to understand how people have reacted, and how can we actually look to best support them in the future in a post-lockdown world?
That's amazing. Thank you so much. I think my nanny's one of those people. She's missing the Gurdwara because that's her life. Every day for her, 5 a.m. is Gurdwara. And then when lockdown came for her, it was like, what's the point living? I can't see Guru Sahib. The TV's not the same thing. And I used to go there and support her and say, it's okay. It's only temporary. But it was that vent that she could do. And otherwise, you can imagine that's just one person in our family. Can you imagine how many families out there rely on going to the Gurdwara as their support system? And now it's shut down, literally shut down. And the TV for them is just not the same thing as seeing someone. And yeah. Also, like, how do you support someone who refuses to have help? I mean, do you ever have that where like you've been told that someone needs help and you reach out, but they don't want to know?
So I think, and this is one of the hardest things when it comes to this work, because sometimes we might think we know what people want, but at the end of the day, all we can do is ensure that we have our hand reached out for if and when that person wants to seek different kinds of support. We can tell people what we think. It doesn't mean it's going to change their actions. And so sometimes this is where, the idea of patience comes in a lot with this work. We just need to be prepared. We need to know what types of services are available. We need to know how to access those services. We need to know how to provide the best space for someone who might be using these services. This is the hard part. That is the waiting game is sometimes the hardest part, because you might be able to see someone who is experiencing difficulties, but they might not be able to see it themselves. And so we just need to be in a space where we can be ready to support that person and love them unconditionally when they do want to seek support. And it just comes back to, we talk about compassion a lot, right? But how do you actually? This is the true test of compassion. It's the true test of patience, and that's one of the hardest things, because we might see loved ones who are going through things, and we might say to them, "You need to do this, you need to do that," but at the end of the day, do they want to be heard? Do they want to be told exactly what they need to do? They need to be, told like a child almost. Sometimes, waiting and sometimes just being there and loving unconditionally is such a powerful thing.
Mm. Yeah.
The only thing I'd add to that, sorry, I think that's articulated brilliantly. We need to be willing to shelve our judgment, which is a very, very difficult thing to do culturally, maybe in the Punjabi community, but also to maintain trust and ensure that we transmit that to the person in need. That what they've said to you won't go any further. That's certainly the cornerstone of our forums as they are. And that's probably why more and more people keep coming back.
Yeah. Just on that note, I was going to ask, like, do you see like variations? Of course, the people who have come from overseas and settled in the West, or the people who are born and raised in UK or even other Western countries. So, what's the variation in the strategies you see to deal with these kind of issues?
And thank you for raising that, Benji. Really, really important topic, especially when we're looking at things like COVID-19 and lockdown as well. So one of the little findings from the research that we've had, first generation migrants out of Punjab, so people who have left Punjab and gone to live elsewhere, have been some of the hardest hit people within COVID-19 and lockdown. Their mental health has taken a huge toll. And we've seen that both for people who had previous mental health challenges and also for people who didn't have previous mental health challenges. And so when we're thinking about how to support first generation migrants, sometimes we might be having these forums, having these conversations, but they might not be as accessible to others. We're speaking in English. How can we have these conversations in Punjabi? How can we have these conversations in other languages that make it accessible? And also, we need to think about what might work for us isn't necessarily something that works for everyone. As Amardeep mentioned earlier, sometimes we think within policy, we think, okay, we have these people experiencing one thing. Let's do this solution. Okay, it works for them. Let's try it with everyone else. And oftentimes we see that we are very, very complex as humans. And so people just react differently to different things. And I've heard a really, really fantastic experience from Jasprit Singh, who is based in Birmingham. And he's an international student, and he has spoken largely about the support that different Gurdwara Sahibs have offered international students during this time. And we've seen different funds set up to try and support these students, because these are a subsection of first generation populations who might be here without their friends and without their families. And so we really need to think about how we support first generation migrants, within student populations, older populations, and everything in between. But yeah, and we don't have all the answers straight away. And I never claim to have all the answers, because as soon as we think we know, well, then we've lost. We need to always be asking, always be willing to learn, and always be willing to engage people whose experiences best fit these types of areas. And only then we can work with them. Taraqi works with Punjabi communities. We don't work for them. It's faced towards Sangat. It is informed by Sangat, and we are powered by Sangat. Without Sangat, we're nothing. And so we're always trying to learn.
Yeah. And just before Amardeep continues this topic, do you feel a challenge, like, with the older generation, sometimes they don't want to speak to youngsters, same way like the young people who are born in the West, they don't want to speak to, they say, oh, they're Punjabi people, they have come from overseas, they don't want to speak to them. It's a level of understanding they believe that they have with the people from their own culture. So I think that's another challenge that your team, if you could probably elaborate, do you guys face that?
So I'll just really quickly go, and then Amardeep can go. I remember when I had one of the first conversations I had around Taraqi, and I was speaking to one of the elder generation, and they said, mental health gore de Jija. And that was the first time I thought, okay, all right, we need to approach this differently because the way we're approaching it at the moment isn't working. And that's really, that comment is what really pushed Taraqi at the beginning. But I'm sure Amandeep can also speak now to this topic.
I think it's varied. We do find that some of the older generation are less receptive, or maybe the language that's being used is not something that resonates with them. However, we've also found with our forums, some of the older or first generation or other folk from maybe parents' generation that have participated have been some of the wiser heads, and so the ones who've been able to impart a lot of knowledge and actually drive certain things and open up our eyes to certain things. So I don't want people to think it's just one thing. We've all got some sort of experience of a parent, someone of our parents' generation or grandparents' generation saying something that maybe didn't sound as positive or helpful as we might like. But actually, some of the experiences that we've had have really been driven positively by the older generation, because they do have that wisdom, they have that lived experience, and much of what we're saying does resonate to some of them as well, and they can be really helpful allies and supporters.
Yeah, regarding this topic about older generations, Sharonji, I mentioned to you yesterday how I spoke to my mum about mental health and men's mental health particularly, and she just looked at me like, it doesn't exist. Like, what are you talking about? Men don't have mental health issues. And I think that's when I realized, okay, that generation really doesn't understand, or maybe mum, but, even my nanny would be like, because I have a mama who's physically disabled, and he's also, we don't say mental, but we know he is. And she would just say, she would be in complete denial, and she just says, "Mere kaj nazar lagi hai." Someone's done this. So it's really easy to play the victim and put the blame on somebody else. But the fact is, something's happened, and why can't we talk about it? And then she'll shut me down and doesn't want to talk about how or why or when it started. And it's just one of those things. I can't indulge into it more. I can't educate them because they're not willing to listen. So do you find that when you're with the older generation and you're trying to talk to them, they're really not listening? Is there ways or strategies of how to get them to, how to say it properly to them in the right way?
So, and this is where another real importance around patience comes in, because we can sometimes forget that the generations who moved out of Punjab into different countries, the difficulties that they went through can be unfathomable to us. And I can think about my grandparents and how they toiled and how they worked for survival in a way that I've never had to do. And so, when I speak to older generations around topics like mental health, that's always at the forefront of my mind, because they've gone through different kinds of traumas and they've lived with those traumas for decades. And just because a young person is going to come and speak to them and ask them why they might think a certain way, they might have locked that up for so long, and that might be a really difficult conversation for them to have as well. And so, as with everything, it's trying to approach these topics slowly, with compassion, with care, and with patience. Because people can feel as though they're being spoken at, but we want people to feel as though we're speaking with them. We're on this journey with them. We're not trying to say, you think this, you need to think this, but we're trying to say, these are the things that can happen. These are some of the things that can be a consequence of these types of behaviors or these types of experiences. But we're here that we all want to learn, and we don't just want to learn because I know that you're wrong. It's that we want to learn so we can be better for ourselves and we can be better for each other. And there's one really good YouTube video called Haneri. That's Haneri. It's called Haneri the Storm. So that's the title, and it's basically a 15-minute clip, all in Punjabi, it's like a short film. It's about a a family, a Punjabi family in Canada, and experiences of mental health challenges with daughter in that family. And so that was really, really hard hitting, and it's all in Punjabi, so it's very accessible. I wouldn't say that you just show that video to the older generations, because that could really just start, that could really trigger something. But it's a good thing for people to watch who might want to just develop a bit more of an understanding. So people who already show that interest.
That's great. Thank you so much. Amrit, did you want to mention anything about this as well, or?
The only thing I'd add is we're increasingly seeing Punjabi language materials being created. Part of the dynamic that's described is someone saying something to someone of an older generation, and that can almost feel like finger pointing to the recipient, to the person being told something, and that often gets people's backs up. What we found with written materials in Punjabi is there isn't a compulsion on people to read them, but that you kind of give the autonomy to the person who's receiving them. They can read, learn about a subject, and look things up in their own time. And that sometimes takes away some of that tension, some of the defensive response that is kind of a reflex for people who might wonder why you're commenting on, their child or themselves, and how they run their life. So we're developing more materials like that through Taraqi, but we're not the only organization that does so. There's some excellent organizations, particularly in North America, that have produced things COVID related, but also more broadly for mental health. And I think that's one of the tools that can be used to get through.
I liked how earlier you mentioned that we've got to be mindful of how the older generation and what they've been through, and that's the foremost put. And I remember, like, maybe my granddad, he's passed away now, but he used to always say, like, whatever's in front of you, whatever's happening now with you, your education, everything, is because we worked very hard. And he used to tell us a story of how he got to England, and I could never walk those shoes. And I'm so glad I don't have to, because it was such hardship for them. And I understand what they went through, working so many hours a day just to, make sure that we were all educated and we all had everything that they didn't have. But I used to always ask them as a kid as well. So when all this happened to you, like you used to have to walk barefooted in the forest, or, other people's stories, how did you feel? And then they just shut you down and say, we don't want to talk about this. This is not a topic we talk about. And I think that's because they didn't know how to talk, or it was something normal. And with my parents, it's been, you can talk about these things. You can talk about anything. But with my grandparents, even my nanny now, she wouldn't be able to read a Punjabi text or even English, let alone English, Punjabi even. So again, it has to be with us talking to her or reading it out for her. So even that generation, some of them still don't know, or some are illiterate, that they don't know how to read and write. So, but it is good that it's available for the ones who can read and write, and that can still educate themselves at that age. And so with mental health issues, how do you suggest ideas for how family members should deal with this type of illness, or any type in specific?
So I think from our perspective, especially if we're not someone who is experiencing the mental health difficulties ourselves, it's asking the person how we can best support them and how we can make a space where they feel comfortable, where they feel empowered, and where they feel open to be able to have conversations with you. If someone is seeking support, if someone is engaging in different types of therapies or different types of supports, then they don't need to always speak about their difficulties at home as well. But it's just being mindful that if they do want to speak about them, we can create a space where people feel comfortable. But if they don't want to speak about them, then that's fine as well. We just carry on and we think, how can we best support the people that we're living with? And oftentimes, at home here, one of the things my mum started asking us over the last few months is, she'd just randomly say, oh, how would you rate your mental health at the moment? and I'd be like, I don't know, like 7.5 and all this kind of thing. But we've really become we're not scared anymore to say to each other, how can we actually best support each other as a family? Like, okay, if you're going through some a difficult few days, how can we make that easier for you? Is it that we'll clean the pond a bit more? Is it that we'll pick up a few of the different things that we do around the house? Is it that we can just we'll leave you to kind of have some time for yourself? Because I've also gone from living on my own to living in a house of 6 people now. So it's just asking those questions. How can we support you? How can we make sure that we're creating a space where you feel comfortable, but also one that we're not scared to talk about emotions, and we can feel as though we can have these conversations. And just really quickly to build on the last point, there are a couple of other really good videos, particularly for older generations and for people who might not access resources in the way that a lot of people do. On YouTube, for example, is an organization called Sorge Mental Health, and Sorge do a lot of really, really cool videos. They do a weekly show on the Sick channel, and they cover a lot of topics on their videos. And so recently there was one on alcoholism. There have been ones on arts therapy. We did one on male mental health. And then also there's an organization called Sick Your Mind, and Sick Your Mind have put out a Punjabi language kind of mindfulness meditation. And so just doing these things with older generations, we don't need to go there and have the really difficult conversations with them straight away, but we can just say, do we want to do some Simran? Do we want to do some Part? Or do we want to do like, a Punjabi language mindfulness meditation where it's something different? And it might be a slightly different experience that can help them in a way that we don't really see.
Thanks, Sharon. I'm just conscious of the time, and we still got a few questions. And just moving forward, I want to ask about, we know there is a silent or unspoken problem of alcohol consumption in the Punjabi society. I want to ask, like, how do you see the relationship of like the probability of alcohol consumption with Punjabi community while there are mental health issues?
Well, in my day job, I work with a liver consultant at my local hospital. He's run a number of audits that show we have overrepresentation of Punjabi Sikh men in alcohol-related hospital admissions. We know that alcohol is a depressant. It has a lot of impacts on a person's mind, and is a very, very serious risk factor for serious mental health issues, alongside the physical health stuff. It's something that we've addressed and kind of continue to work with partner organizations to try and address. I don't know if there's much research kind of specifically linking bad mental health outcomes to alcoholism, but it's certainly, alcoholism is one of the biggest social issues and a big driver of social problems in the Punjabi community. I think it's actually very difficult to overstate how big a problem it is.
Yep.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. As I was growing up, I used to always hear the phrase, you drink alcohol either because you're depressed or you're in social pressure. And I used to ask my dad this, like, why are you drinking? And he'd be like, I enjoy it. And I'd be like, but why? And there'd be no real answer towards it. And he'd be like, so why don't you just have one drink rather than 10? And it never used to make me want to drink or anything like that. But I used to just think, why? What's the need? And now I understand why, but I won't ask questions further now. No, but it is a massive issue in especially in the Punjabis as well. And we're in major denial about it, and we don't talk about it. And we should definitely, I've learned this from a young age, we don't talk, especially when they're drunk. You talk when they've gone sober, so that you can then have their mind, which is going to be at least at a level where they can have a conversation with you. Because when they're drunk, they just say all sorts of things because they're angry. So,
and that leads to other problems like maybe family violence and other stuff that comes into the picture.
There's a big issue of people self-medicating with alcohol, but also there is probably a lack of understanding in the community, and not just the Punjabi community, but communities generally, and definitely in acute healthcare, in physical healthcare, We struggle to understand addiction as a process, as an issue. We struggle to communicate appropriately about that and serve people that are in the middle of alcohol-related struggle. Locally in kind of Sandwell and Birmingham area where I work, we have a very good alcohol support team in our trust, which has won a number of awards, which is for mainly patients that have been hospitalized with alcoholism. And we see a high representation of the group, that total group being from Punjabi community. They're looking to, they understand the issues and they're looking to try to connect with organizations that can provide Punjabi language support and understand the cultural issues. So they understand as a healthcare provider that they can't necessarily connect in the same way with Punjabis as they might be able to with other service users. And gradually we're finding there are organizations based in the UK that are looking to address that. There's been the Shanti project in the UK, which was quite successful but quite short-lived. And that was based in Birmingham, which was specifically aimed at Punjabi men, about Punjabis with alcohol issues. We just need culturally appropriate responses and to be able to connect people up to services to make sure they're understood and can navigate that difficult process of getting past addiction.
That's great. Thank you. Do you also have, are you ever in that situation where someone's asked you, not to give up somebody because they've got a mental illness, but that their mind is not stable because they're not able to deal with somebody else in the family with this type of illness? Have you ever had it where you've had to give advice that perhaps you need to put them in a, I don't know if it's an institution or a place where they go so that at least you're then keeping your mind at rest, because otherwise it's going to drive you crazy too? Have you ever had to have those type of situations?
So me personally, I'm lucky enough to not have been in that type of situation, but I know some people who have been, and they're particularly difficult because you might be in a situation where you don't look at something until it's at tipping point, and oftentimes this is what we see. We see people access services at their worst, when there are plenty of chances before that for us to access services when we might be experiencing difficulties, but they're not as serious at that point. And so there are in your local area, there will be kind of community mental health teams who can offer specific advice related to someone who might be going through particularly serious challenges. But I think one of the takeaway points from that, and one of the things we need to emphasize, is that seeking help and reaching out shouldn't only happen when we are at our worst or when a family member is at their worst. We need to really equip ourselves with the skills to be able to recognize potential signs and symptoms of mental health challenges, so that we can actually create a space where someone can feel empowered to seek help and empowered to seek support early rather than late. And I talk to a lot of mental health professionals who say, Apne Punjabi communities, Sikh communities, we only go out and seek help when things are at their worst. And it's good that people are seeking help. It's better than not seeking help. But the next stage, how this is just something I like thinking, in the future rather than just thinking about now. The next stage is that we can feel comfortable seeking help, and we can recognize when things are challenging earlier, rather than just looking at it when things are particularly bad.
Yeah, and can I just ask, do you see a link between that more mental health issues are prevailing these days in our community because of the migration? There's a lot of globalization, and people are moving from one country. Of course, they are not in the same family setup they were in their home country, and that's leading to more stress, settlement. Is that more of that kind of issues you come behind these mental health issues as well?
I think what we're seeing is people coming forward a bit more and discussing issues more. recognizing them and understanding the language to describe mental health issues. So I think it's more a case of people understanding what diagnosis is and accessing services and the issues that probably before weren't picked up or were brushed under the carpet, or people didn't talk about, or when there'd been a suicide in the family, they'd say something else had happened. We're seeing people being a lot more open and understanding about that kind of thing. So I suspect, as certainly in the UK, we've had waves of immigration for 50, 60 years. I imagine those issues have been concerns all the way through that time. It's just we're better able to describe them, we're better able to access care, and we're more willing to discuss these issues and access that care.
And just to also really quickly build on what Amardeep has mentioned, when we're looking at people who have migrated to new places, people who have gone and left their families or brought their families with them, we can't deny that things like racism, experiences of discrimination impact our mental health. If someone is walking in a situation, because me personally, I've experienced this type of thing, and I can see that link, and I can see how experiences of discrimination, whether that's racism, classism, sexism, all these different types of things, impact our mental well-being. And so it's really easy, I think, especially for second and third generations, to forget that when individuals move out of Punjab and come to different countries, that whole process it can be so difficult. And sometimes we don't make that process easier. We actually make it more difficult. And so it's one of those things that we really need to think about what people might be transitioning in their lives, how people might be living, and how can we be best supportive of that person. Because if we think we've experienced difficulties growing up, I'm third generation. I think I've experienced particular forms of difficulties. I can't even imagine the types of difficulties someone who's first generation might be experiencing. And acknowledging and seeing that this types of discrimination can impact our mental health is a really, really important part of it as well.
That's absolutely correct. That's so good. Well put as well. Thank you so much for sharing that. There's so much. We've only got another 5 minutes, but there's so much I want to ask with this topic because it's gone and opened doors in so many ways. Thank you so much, guys. And another question I want to ask, especially because I've got young children, how do you teach children? I mean, Dipin's put a comment as well regarding children, starting them from young and talking about this to them. But how do you actually, what's the strategy where do you start with teaching children about mental health? What suggestions do you have?
So I think one of the things that is, so I'm not an expert in kind of child education or this kind of thing, but one of the things that I found has been particularly powerful is that, everyone listening today, everyone who watches this program has the potential to be a role model in how we talk about mental health and how we approach the topic of mental health. For me personally, one of the biggest role models I've had has been my dad, who's spoken to me about the challenges he's experienced, and he redefined that for me. For me, him being, my dad and seeing him speak about his vulnerabilities was such a powerful thing. And it really just proved to me that sometimes we look and think, who's going to be the role model? When we don't look at ourselves and think about how can we actually show that this behavior, show that these actions are legitimate, and to show them that they're valued. And so even to fathers, mothers, everyone who is listening today, we all have the potential to have these conversations with our children. They don't need to just learn about things externally. They can know that these are things that impact their families, things that impact their immediate surroundings. And sometimes I think we think young kids aren't picking things up and they're not kind of aware of what's happening. My younger brother's 12 and he's more aware than anyone about what's happening. You can't keep anything from him. And he's so in touch with these types of topics because we've just discussed them. And we've spoken about them in normal ways, we've spoken about them in funny ways. We just, it's a part of the furniture, it's a part of the conversations that we have. And so sometimes we like looking outwards and we say, what books do we need to read? What videos do we need to watch? But, Bella, let's look inside and let's think about how we can model that behavior for our children because, with Marjika Barnett, we have parents can be such amazing role models in different ways, and this is just one of the ways we can take that forward.
Yeah, that's so well said. I just want to add on, besides outside your family and friend circle, I've seen that the Sikhi camps that are held, especially in the countries, in the Western countries, and nowadays in India as well, I think they help a lot. I remember in the Khalsa camp that we've been having every year, there has been, in the past few years, they have started doing some just youth session just for the boys and men only as well. And I think having that conversation in those camps is also very useful, where they can discuss about their own issues. So separate one for girls and separate one for males and females as well. So I think that's very helpful. So thank you so much. I think I learned a lot in today's session, and I believe our audience would have also learned many strategies. How can they, practically use these tips to deal with these mental health issues in their own, in their own circles and in the community as well. And I would like to share a screen on here. So these are some of the 24/7 mental health services in Australia. So if anyone think that they are having any kind of issues in Australia, so be it kids or beyond blue, or even if there is anything suicide kind of issue, so please do call back. These are 24/7 helplines. So please do take help from these services as well. We'll also share this particular screenshot in the comments as well. So just before we end the session today, any last comments or any last words you would like to share with our audience today?
I think really, really quickly, it's just what I just said before. We can all be role models in how we talk about mental health. We think, is the change going to come from this place? Is it going to come from that place? But really, we all have the power to enact this type of change. And it's not going to come immediately. We can show this type of behavior. We can be role models, but it's a long-term thing. It's a commitment. You can't just do it for 2 days. And so we're really thinking about how we can start this change, how we can be that spark. Anyone can be a spark, and I think it's so important to know that we all have this power.
All I would add is we have the power to think consciously about how we discuss issues, how we discuss the issues that other people are facing elsewhere, particularly in our home, particularly in front of children, because that will shape how they view things. We don't need to stigmatize mental health. We don't need to. We need to speak about things like suicides in a compassionate and kind manner, and a non-judgmental manner, and be honest about things within the home setting and outside, and that's how you produce a change and maintain it.
Thank you so much for both of you to come onto our show today. I'm so grateful. I've learned so much, and I could be talking about this topic so much more as well, because I've got so much more to ask, but we can leave that for another time. One main thing I've learned about this show is listening. Just being there and listening to someone can be powerful within itself. So thank you for sharing that, because sometimes we just need to hear that again. That's one of the powerful tools to use. And thank you, audience, for joining in as well. And I just want to say, Fateh, Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.